All right, let me first introduce myself. I think some of you already know who I am, and some of you have already seen the orientation videos. So my name is Ankush Sharma. I've done PhD in international relations from South Asian University. I've also been a former lecturer, assistant professor of political science. I've also qualified UGC NET, All India Rank 3 for international relations and also for political science. I've been teaching UPSC students polity, uh, initially IR plus PSIR for give and take past 10 years as of now. And for the next 50 classes, we're going to study polity, constitution, and governance. And we're going to study it so that you're able to qualify the prelims examination and the mains examination. That is our goal. The goal is not to make you an expert of law. Not the goal is not to make you an expert of polity. The goal is one, which is to make sure that you're able, if there are 15 questions in prelims, you're able to attempt correctly all the 15 questions, and you're able to attempt all the polity and governance questions that come in the mains examination within the appropriate time and with the appropriate answer writing. That is the primary goal here. And within that context, the first thing you should know is the syllabus itself. And this is very important for UPSC because this gives you an understanding on how to prepare your notes also. So as far as the prelims examination syllabus is concerned, it's quite open-ended. It says Indian polity and governance, constitution, political system, panchayati raj, public policy, rights issues, etc. Now, because it says etc., it includes everything under the sun. So it becomes difficult to actually prepare your prelims examination for polity from the polity syllabus itself because it includes almost everything within its context. So it's best, therefore, when you're preparing for prelims examination, is to take the context of the syllabus given the mains examination. So polity and governance is there in GS paper 2, right? So governance, constitution, and polity. So what we're going to do is that once every topic is done, I'll tell you which part of the syllabus we have done. And every part of the syllabus would be covered here. This is by and large the complete syllabus of how polity and governance would be undertaken. So from here till here, you have the syllabus of what is known as polity and constitution. And this is the syllabus for governance. These two things will do separately. The governance is a completely separate subject. It has overlap with GS paper 4, ethics and governance. And this is therefore a separate topic that we'll do once we have done completely with polity and governance. Once we start with polity and governance, I'll tell you which part of the syllabus is complete. This part is clear to everyone? If anyone during the class, they have any doubt, you're able to unmute yourself, all of you, yes or no? Are you able to unmute yourself during the classes by yourself? All right. All right. So if you have any doubts during the classes, just ask, right? You have paid good money for my time here, so use it effectively. One of the primary problem that happens with UPSC preparation is, let's say, and I'll talk about polity and governance specifically, is that it goes fast because there's so many topics within polity and governance. Like if you take the constitution consists of more than 1 lakh words, right? And as far as your UPSC syllabus or your notes would be concerned, so they're going to be roughly around 400, 450 pages, but that's about 80,000 words. So at the end of the 50 classes, you're going to write about 80,000 words give and take. And that would cover both your prelims and mains. So what happens is that, fine, we'll start slow, but by the time you get to the 15th and 20th classes, it picks up a pace. And one of the problems that I've seen is that if you miss classes or if you miss a concept, it becomes difficult to understand something when we talk about it later in the classes. So let's say in today's class, I'll explain what the concept of state is. Now, state we'll do today, but we'll also do it when we do Article 12. So when I do Article 12, I'll tell you, all right, if you remember from the first class, we've talked about the concept of the state, and it consists of this, this, this. But I won't be explaining it again. I'll be explaining Article 12 itself. And I expect that what I've taught in the first class, you're able to follow through. So the best thing is if you miss classes, I mean, watch them again. But during the classes, if you have any doubt, ask. You have paid money for my time, use it appropriately, use it effectively. If you have any doubt during the classes, ask me twice, ask me thrice. I'll explain it again. And if you don't understand, then I'll tell you to call me and I'll uh, explain to you after the class itself. It's not a problem. But just make sure that during the classes, you get the concept completely. This part is clear to everyone? All. Now, as far as the prelims examination is concerned, every year you're going to have roughly around 15 questions that come up in prelims from polity. Right? Roughly. Right. It goes sometimes lower to 12, 13, sometimes goes higher to 17 to 20, but give and take, you get about 15 questions. Out of this, every year, you're going to get about 2 questions that are going to come from NCERT. So NCERT, I've explained in the orientation also. One of the thing and one of the books that is essential for you to read is class 11th NCERT. And sorry, class 11th NCERT, Indian Constitution at Work and Political Theory. I'll tell you the primary difference here. The political theory from 2019 till give and take 2023, every year 1 or 2 questions was coming from this book, like what is liberty, what is law, those kind of concepts were coming from this book. For the past, I think 2 or 3 years, I've not seen any questions come from them at all. So it gives a very good understanding on concepts like liberty, equality, and all of this, which we'll anyways cover in the class. But yes, for the past few years, the questions have not been coming, but it does not mean that you skip it. It's a very small book. Once the classes are done, then you need to read the NCERT because it gives you a good ability. As of now, if you're going to read the NCERT, you're going to read about equality, freedom. You're going to read about Article 368 at Indian Constitution at Work and all of this. The problem that would happen is you don't have a basic background in any of this. So it becomes difficult to understand what NCERT or the depth of what NCERT is trying to explain. But once the classes are done, you have a complete understanding or an in-depth understanding of every concept. So it becomes easier to glance through NCERT, to read it quickly. So what I'm trying to say is that all of these books that we talked about in the orientation, whether it's Laxmikanth, whether it's NCERT, read it after the class. This would make it easier for you to read those books quickly. Otherwise, it's going to become difficult because what is going to happen is you're going to read a chapter. There might be few words you don't understand. You'll go online, you go on YouTube to look for those and understand them. It's going to waste time. You're already having multiple classes. So the best thing you right now you can do is that once we go through the classes, there are certain topics that we'll end up covering, revise them, right? Just revise what has been written. I'm going to give you class test also, go through those class tests. After that, there might be some chapters. Let's say we have done preamble, right? Let's say we did preamble, revise it, do the class test, then read the appropriate chapter, let's say from Laxmikanth. See whether you're able to understand what has been written here. Now, if you're not able to understand what has been written in that chapter, there are either two things. Either I have not explained properly, then you tell me in the next class that I have not understood what this concept means. But if you have gone through the complete chapter, 3-4 pages are there in Laxmikanth, and you understand everything that is written, it means you have a conceptual understanding of that particular topic. Then we move on to, let's say, union and its territory. Same thing. We've covered it in the class. You go home, you revise, you do the class test, and then let's say you read it from Laxmikanth. And if you're able to understand everything, that means that topic you have understand on a conceptual level. So that is a good way on how to conduct yourself after the classes are done or after the class has been done. This part is clear, right? So whatever we study, you revise, do the class test, read it from the appropriate book, and if you're able to understand, fine. If you're not able to understand, then tell me. All right, so this is something that is written in the book, I'm not able to understand. So I'll explain it again. So same way, let's say I've explained secularism in class. I'll tell you, all right, go to NCERT. There is a particular chapter which talks about freedom of religion and also talks about secularism. Read it. If you're not able to understand, same idea. You ask me, sir, I've not understood this idea that has been given in NCERT. So this becomes a two-way effort. On a per day effort, DD Basu Tanuj is completely optional. Um, you can get Subhash Kashyap's book because it is given by the NBT. So it's a government book. So it gives a good understanding of the political system. But again, after the classes are done, DD Basu is too complicated. Like it's something I see generally law students refer to, but it's written in a very complicated manner. So I generally don't recommend students reading uh, DD Basu. But yes, if you're from a law background, then fine, you can pick up DD Basu. It's not a problem. Yeah, Vanshika, I'll tell you which chapter to read from Laxmikanth. That's not a problem. See, the point is I don't recommend, well, you sometimes see videos online and other faculties also talking about this, that don't read Laxmikanth, don't. There 5 lakh students giving UPSC. There are 5 lakh students that have Laxmikanth. So I'm not going to go against the tide here because anyways, all of you are going to buy this anyway. What is how to do it effectively, how to use it properly. So the better way of using it, Laxmikanth doesn't help with mains at all. It's not helpful for mains, but it is helpful for prelims. There is no doubt about it. That is why it is popular. The best way to use it, we've done something in the class, revise, class test, read it from Laxmikanth, see whether you've understood everything that is written there. So that is a good way of going through this. Yeah. This part is clear to everyone? Right. All right. Apart from this, I'll tell you why NCERT is important. Out of the 15 questions that come up every year, about 2 come directly from NCERT. So if you take every subject then, so let's say you take geography, you take environment, you take economy. So with every subject, about 2 questions would come from NCERT. So if let's say you're preparing for 7 or 8 subjects, that is about 15 to 16 questions that are coming from NCERT directly. That is why NCERT is quite important because the number of pages of NCERT is actually quite less and it is written in a simple manner. Because of these 2 factors, it becomes easy that, all right, 16 questions are coming directly from this. So it's easy to prepare accordingly. And the other reason that let's say you might find people that, let's say I've given prelims 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, but have not qualified. And if they generally ask any teacher or they ask any topper, like what should I do? The first thing anyone tells is that go and read the NCERTs. The one reason why people end up saying this, because it has good cost benefit. Because about 15, 16 questions are coming from this, it helps easy to qualify for prelims examination. The second thing is that if you're not able to actually qualify for prelims, the core idea or the core problem is that there is some conceptual weakness. There is a topic that you have not understood well. And that is why you're not able to qualify. You sometimes hear of students that have qualified for or given mains 3, 4 times or written mains 3, 4 times. That means they've qualified for 3, 4 times also for prelims examination. So if you're good for mains, should not be difficult. That's the main idea. Prelims should not be difficult if you're already prepared for mains examination. Right? This part is clear, right? You understand on how to use the NCERT also. So I'll give you an example. This question was asked in 2025. It talks about that these are various provisions in the Constitution. Where are they stated? It's quite easy question. But if you see it from the NCERT, uh, it talks about valuing and preserving rich heritage of our composite culture. Value and preserving the rich heritage of our composite culture given in the fundamental duties. Similarly, the Constitution forbids employment below the age of 14 years given under right against exploitation, which is given in the fundamental rights. So it becomes easy. Then it becomes easier for you to solve this question. Similarly, you have this question asked in 2024. As per Article 368 of the Constitution, the Parliament may amend any provisions of the Constitution by addition, variation, or repeal. I don't want you to answer the question because as of now you don't have the conceptual understanding of this. But if you look at from the NCERT, it is given. Article 368 provides by way of addition, variation, or repeal, the Parliament may amend the Constitution. So you have direct questions. Similarly, you take this question of 2024. A writ of prohibition is an order issued by the Supreme Court or High Court. And if you see here, given in the NCERT, a writ of prohibition is issued by a higher court when a lower court has gone beyond its jurisdiction. So if you read the statements, which statement would be correct here? C, right? The writ of prohibition is an order issued by the Supreme Court or High Courts to the lower courts prohibiting continuation in the proceedings of a case. Right? Same if you look at this question from 2022. And this gives you an idea on how the prelims question are made. You have three statements overall. If you look at the first statement, a bill amending the constitution requires a prior recommendation of the President of India. When a constitutional amendment bill is presented to the President, it is obligatory for the President of India to give their assent. A constitutional amendment bill must be passed by both the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha by special majority, and there is no provision for joint sitting. If you look at the question, I'll get to that, Tanuj. If you look at this question, there are 5 facts. Even if there are 3 statements, there are 5 facts. And if you don't know one of those facts, it becomes difficult to completely answer this question itself. And this is something that becomes the problem when um, you give a MCQ question or you give a prelims paper, and sometimes you feel like, all right, I'm confused between this point and or between B and C or between A and D. And the primary reason it happens is that there is a particular fact which you are not completely sure of. And what this basically means is that there is certain lack in factual clarity over a topic. But if you look at the NCERT, it talks about both the houses of the parliament must pass the amendment bill, and there is no provision for joint session, right? So it talks about this statement. Similarly, there must be here itself. Or it must be here somewhere. Not able to find. But if you look at actually all the statements that are given in this question, you find them within the NCERT. So if you see each year, you see this from 2022, the Constitution of India classifies ministers into 4 ranks. The total number of ministers in the union government, including the PM, shall not exceed 15% of the members in the Lok Sabha. All of these statements, 15% of the members of the House of People or the Lok Sabha. What are the ranks? Cabinet Minister, Minister of State, and Deputy Minister. Both the statements are given within the NCERTs. So each year, I don't want to go through each year's paper because we'll go through all the MCQs as the classes go forward. But at least every year, at least 2 questions generally come from the NCERT. That's why they are important. The question that Tanuj asked, that this year there was no NCERT question. This year the question paper was problematic, right? It broke on how the questions have generally been asked. So when you find a lot of students that gave the prelims this year and faculties also that talk about the way that the paper was set this year, They call it absurd. They call it there was problematic and all of this. Why? Because there was a set recognized patterns that you're going to have certain questions that would come from the NCERT. NCERT, the questions were there. About 66 questions came from NCERT plus PIP. Right? So it's not like the questions did not come from NCERT. The problem was that the questions, at least for polity, did not come from NCERT this year at all. There were no questions from NCERT that came in the 2026 prelims examination. But it does not mean it would not happen in 2027 or 2028. You find that fine, UPSC has taken certain steps. They've told that the questions are going to come from the basic books like and basic sources like PIB and NCERT and NEOS books and all of this. So the presumption is like fine, in the coming years you're going to get back to some of the set patterns that were already there. Polity NCERT questions were not there, but it doesn't mean they were not there for any other subjects. 66 questions overall came from proper sources, which includes NCERT plus the PIP. This part is clear, Tanuj? Yeah. Same question. I don't want to go through each of the questions that have come up because once we talk about, let's say, powers of the Lok Sabha, we'll discuss all of these PYQs that have come. Like if you take this chapter, it talks about what are the special powers of the Rajya Sabha, and it also talks about what are the special powers of the Lok Sabha. And this is one of the other questions that I want to talk about. That one of the things that has come up, and we'll talk about the questions that have come up this year also, is which one of the following statement best reflects the chief purpose of the constitution of a country? First, it determines the objective for the making of necessary law. It enables the creation of political offices and a government, defines and limits the powers of the government, secures social justice, social equality, and social security. If you look at the NCERT, it talks about what are the functions of a constitution. To provide a set of basic rules for that allow minimal coordination, decision-making powers in a society, limits on the government, and fulfill the aspirations of the society and create a just society. It says all four are actually the purpose of the constitution. Therefore, the main keyword that comes here is best. So this has come up post-COVID. Actually, before COVID, you had one or two questions that came up in 2017. But post-COVID, you see a lot more of these questions that have come up. And the changes are that it's not like one of the four options is correct. That is not the issue. All the four options is correct. But which one is better than the other? So it is talking about priority or which one functions better. So when we talk about the constitution and the purposes of a constitution, we'll come back to this question and I'll talk about this. But the idea is not just about knowing what the right answer is. The idea is also about knowing what the wrong answers are. It's not fine. If C is correct, that is not the primary thing or the only thing you should know. You should also know why A is wrong or B is wrong or D is wrong. So this is something which is known as falsification. And this is something that we're going to carry out throughout the classes. This concept of falsification. And this is something that is common in MCQ test. So this is something that is quite common in China and the United States and other places where you have certain examinations that are based on MCQs. In India, the concept is not that popular. But the concept basically ends up saying that in an MCQ, if there are four options, your job is not only to know which is the correct option or why a statement is correct. Your job is also to know why the other three are wrong. That why can't A be the answer? Why can't B be the answer? If you're able to tell me all the four things, that why C is correct and why A, B, and D are wrong, that is conceptual clarity. That is something that will work in the class. You have to falsify why the other options are wrong. The concept is known as falsification. So all the MCQs from 2013 till 2020, 6 we're going to discuss in the classes. And we're going to talk about each of the options that are there. Why a particular option is correct, why a particular option is wrong. This is going to ensure that you get conceptual clarity. This is going to ensure that once you do write for the prelims examination, you don't get stuck that, oh, I got stuck between B and C, I marked the wrong answer, or the cutoff was 76, but I got 73, 74, or something like this. Do not be stuck in that position at any point of time. And the only way to get that done is to ensure that you have conceptual clarity. You know what the correct answer is, but you have clarity as to why the others are also wrong. And you're able to explain to anyone why that is the case. This part is clear to everyone? All right, I'm not going to go through all of them, but yes, at least um, for from 2013 till date, this has continuously been there. That at least 2 questions have come from for polity prelims have come from NCERT, except for this year. This year has been an exception. We'll wait and see for 2027. But it does not mean because it did not come this year that you skip NCERT. That is not the case. You still read NCERT and you know how to do this, that once the classes are done. All right. Any doubts? Sure. All right, now ask me the question. No, no, no. You're not going to make it from somewhere else. Running notes. So everything that would be in the classes, about 80% of the classes would be dictated, right? So you make the running notes. Second is that there would be some handouts, but that is about 20% of the overall notes that would be there. The reason that I prefer running notes is for one simple reason, is that when you write, there is a certain level of um, memory that kicks in. Whereby, let's say if you're only listening to me for 2 hours continuously and then you wait for the handout that would be given at the end, your mind tend to or tentatively wanders. But if you're making running notes, so I'm explaining something, then you're writing it by yourself. So it gives a certain level of shift where certain things shift from, let's say, temporary memory to permanence. And once you revise this again, you're able to at least put much more into like permanent memory. So I find that running notes are a lot better. But at the end of the day, once the classes are done, you'll get the complete. I think you can ask some of the yes, Vanshika, semantic memory. So um, you can ask some of the students that they can give you the notes, or if you ask me, I'll share them with you. It's not a problem. Any other doubts, anyone? All of you are fine with running notes, right? Yes. All right. As far as the classes are concerned, I'll tell you on how the uh, classes would be done. We're going to study directly from the Bare Act. So what is going to, yes, Tanuj. Yes, this is what I'm getting to. We're going to study directly from the Bare Act. So what happens is after preamble, so that is basically about the fourth or the fifth class after preamble, we're going to start with the Bare Act. And we're going to go through Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, complete list by list. So uh, we're going to study directly. I'll explain what is Article 1, then Article 2, then Article 3, then every mains topic that would be there. So let's say you have gone through union and its territory. So whatever the mains topic that would be there, that I'll, once the part is done, I'll make you write the mains topic that can be asked separately on that. So let's say you talk about part 2, which is citizenship. So once, let's say, we've gone through all the articles of citizenship, then I'll talk about, all right, what is the current issue that is happening with SIR and citizenship? Because that is a mains issue. It can be asked in prelims, but this is not directly mentioned, or SIR is not directly mentioned in the constitution itself. So all of those topics will cover completely. So there is no separation of prelims and mains, but yes, there would be every topic is prelims plus mains, but there are certain topics that are only mains. Right? You say it this way. Every topic is prelims plus mains, but there's few topics that are only mains. And that is how we're going to do this. This part is clear to everyone? And anyways, I'm going to open the Constitution of India in the back and share it on the screen. And through article by article, we're going to go through. And this is why, because the syllabus directly says Constitution of India. And if you've not read the Bare Act itself, or you've not gone through the Bare Act itself, it becomes difficult. Once we go through the classes, you'll understand why the importance of the Bare Act is, because it kicks into what is known as visual memory. So what happens is you see the Constitution in the background. I'm explaining them. You're writing all the words that are there. I'll give you an example. So when my students tentatively they end up giving prelims, and there is this particular question that comes up, whether it is mentioned in the Constitution. Like this year, there was a question. I think this year or last year, there was a question whether the term political party is mentioned in the Constitution. And I generally tell the students, do you remember seeing it when we were going through the class? Or do you remember me talking about this when we were going through the Constitution of India? And most of them actually did the answer correctly. Why? Because it is mentioned. Political party was not mentioned in the original Constitution, but it is mentioned in the 10th schedule. And they ended up doing this correctly. And that is why you have to train yourself accordingly, because you're going to give an exam. You have to prepare for the exam accordingly. So prelims preparation is a little separate from mains preparation. So in both of those factors, you have visual memory that helps a lot. Running notes helps a lot in terms of making sure that you're able to actually understand things better. This part is clear to everyone? Yeah. Any doubts as of now? No. All right. All right. So I don't want to take more time on orientation, and we'll start with the basic understanding. And this is a portion that you now have to write. Basic understanding is that, all right, we're going to start with Constituent Assembly in the next class. Then we're going to go to preamble. After that, we're going to start with Article 1. Now, there are certain terms that I'm going to use in tomorrow's class, or when I'm going to talk about the Constituent Assembly. Not those terms you have to understand today. So any terms that comes up, you're not able to understand, just ask me, so what this term means. But otherwise, what I generally ensure is that any term that I'm going to use in the class, I'm going to explain this beforehand. Right? So there are few terms that you need to understand before we start with officially with the polity classes tomorrow. Right? So write down the first word, which is state. State. Right. Write down. A state is a political entity. A state is a political entity that has the following characteristics. State is a political entity which has the following characteristics. Following characteristics. If I go fast and you're not able to write with the same pace, just tell me, sir, can you slow down? Right? Just unmute yourself and tell me, sir, can you repeat, or can you, sir, like slow down and all of that? Just don't hesitate in the classes. Nobody's do not think what others are going to think if you ask me a question. There are no dumb questions or stupid questions. I never liked when teachers used to say that when I was a student also. Fine, you might have much, as a teacher, a person may have much more knowledge, but I am starting new. and there might be certain terms, there might be certain words I don't understand, and I want to ask what they means. So do not hesitate in asking. There are no dumb questions, there are no stupid questions. You ask, I'll answer. But don't hesitate in making sure that you get clarity over this subject. So just at any point of time, you can unmute yourself, ask me to repeat or ask me to explain. All right. So a state is a political entity with the following characteristics. First one is population. Right? That is the most essential characteristic of a state. That it needs to have people. It needs to have a population. Right? Second, territory. It needs to have a territory. Third, a functioning or a form of government. So it can be any form of government. It doesn't mean it has to be a democracy like us. It can be a dictatorship like North Korea. It can be a monarchy like Saudi Arabia or the United Kingdom. It can be a constitutional monarchy. It can be a presidential system like the United States. It doesn't matter what kind of government. It can be run by a terrorist organization like Afghanistan, which is run by the Taliban. It doesn't matter. What you need is a form of government, any type of government. And the fourth is sovereignty. Right? So those are the four characteristics that are essential for a state: population, territory, government, and sovereignty. Sovereignty is the core idea that I am or the people are supreme, or the government of that particular state is supreme. I'll give you the opposite example in relation to this. Same. Let's say, can there be a state without a territory? Without territory. Can you have a state without territory? Or can you have a population? Population is essential. Like without population, you don't really have a concept of a state. So can you have, let's say, a population or a statehood without territory? And if yes, then what would be called? No, no, I don't get into PSI. I don't, that is nothing like it's one step below at polity. What can it be, Sumit? No, no, not radical forces. Right? Can you have, let's say, a territory without statehood? Right? Slightly different question, but territory without statehood. That there is a landmass, but it does not have, it's not a state. Not sovereign. They're not a state at all. Are there territories which are not a state? Antarctica. Yes, Umesh. Antarctica. Antarctica has a certain level of population, which is not a permanent population. Like it does not have a permanent population. It is a territory, but it is not a state. It is governed by the Antarctica Treaty. This part is clear? Taiwan is different. Like we'll talk about Taiwan. Right? Let's say the can you have a population without statehood? Are there people that don't have a state? All of you have done IR? All right. So one of the things that is what we're going to no, Hafiz, that those are, and same with Chinmay, the stateless people, refugees, they are stateless individuals. I'm not talking about individuals here. It has to be a group of like population. So it means a group of people. It cannot be a single individual in that sense. Even if it's a group of people, it has to seem in a sense of population. Right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say you take Rohingya refugees. Like there are 50,000 Rohingya refugees in India. There are millions within Malaysia or Indonesia. So they are refugees, and some of them are stateless people. But you would not call them a population without a statehood. Why? Because they don't really have other aspects. They never have the territory. They never had the government, and at no point of time they are seeking to have sovereignty. So other concepts cannot be missed here. So are there populations that do not have a statehood? You have to see it in a way where you have a population that is looking to become a state. Uh, uh, so a bigger example of this would be the Kurdish population. They're in the news. One of the things that you have to and will do secessionist movements. So people or groups of population that are undertaking a secessionist movement would generally be seen as a population that do not have a statehood. Meaning they are looking for a state, they're looking to form their own government, and they're looking for sovereignty from another country. That is the core concept here. So Kurdish population, if you see it in a map, there are continuous population that are there in Turkey, they're there in Iraq, they're there in Syria, and they're in Iran. They have been in the news recently because when Donald Trump ended up bombing Iran, he presumed that if he gives weapons to the Kurdish population that live in northern Iran, the northern Iranian Kurdish population would fight the Iranian regime. And then you would have a secessionist movement, which the US would be funding in Iran. But the Kurds in Iran said no. They actually took the weapons and then they said no, that we're not going to fight on your behalf against the Iranian regime. But Kurdish are considered as the largest ethnic group in the world without a state. Right? This part is clear to everyone? You get this concept? Umesh, yes. But Kurd is a better example. You don't want to give examples for secessionist movements from India. Right? Uh, what would you call a state without a government? Like, can you have a state that doesn't have a government? Today, like one of the things that is there in mains, I'll see it from a mains perspective. One of the things that is going to happen is that you need to do interlinkages. It's a general studies paper because you are studying in a, let's say, from a coaching place and from a particular subject faculty. What happens is you isolate everything. You isolate, let's say, geography, you isolate polity, you isolate economy, you isolate these subjects because they're being taught by different teachers and you have different notes and all of this. But the exam doesn't do that. It says general studies. And then it gives polity, governance, constitution, international relations, social justice as a syllabus for GS paper 2. So as let's say tomorrow you become an IAS officer, and I'll tell you why this is the case. You have, let's say, the mains examination and you take GS2. You're going to do two questions on polity, then another question that would come on social justice, then two more questions on IR, and then another question that would come on governance, another question that would come in IR, and finally 20 questions would be done from different subjects. So you get about 9 minutes to answer one question in GS paper. So for 9 minutes, you're thinking about polity on a particular subject. Then you're thinking 9 minutes on IR. Then you're thinking 9 minutes on social justice. Then again, you're thinking 9 minutes on polity. Why does UPSC keep on doing this? Because that is the job that they're preparing you for. As an IAS officer, you might get a file that is, let's say, from the mines department. You get another file that is from, let's say, the panchayat department. You get another file that is from the patwari department. So that means as an IAS officer, you are continuously changing or the thought process from patwari to land to panchayat to waters to electricity to all of this. So the exam is testing you for the job that you're going to have in the future. And that is why it is important. And that is why the mains is patterned in this particular way. It's not random. These are based on committee recommendations that you need to conduct the exam in this manner. So one of the things that I've seen students do and why they're not then not able to score good marks in mains examination, even though they write well and all of this, is sometimes they just miss interlinkages. So if it's a question on polity, do not isolate yourself only on polity. Give examples. 80% of the answer, fine, comes from polity. 20% has to have interlinkages. You're linking things to economy. You're linking things to social justice. You're linking things to geography. You're linking things to different aspects. That is what UPSC tentatively looks for. That is given in the UPSC uh, syllabus statement also. And that is how the exams are patterned. Like it doesn't make sense now. You study so many subjects and in the exam, one question after the other from different subjects because it prepares for the job that you're going to have. This part is clear. That's why all of the examples that I'm making you write are coming from IR. Tomorrow we'll do another subjects. Let's say we're talking about socialist from preamble. The examples would come from economy. We're talking about secularism. The examples would come from society and social justice, right? So I'm going to make sure that with polity, it's not just polity that you learn. You understand on how to link it to different aspects also. You get this concept? You understand the mains, or um, at least in the first class and the second class, you'll get an understanding on how the classes are going to go forward. And you'll understand the pattern in the way that I teach. And interlinkage for me is an important aspect on how I teach polity. So the examples, the schemes and all of these, they come from other subjects, not only polity. So tell me, what would you call a state without a government? It comes up in the news way too often. What is Libya? Not a parallel government. Parallel government means there are two governments. I'm asking a state without a government. Okay? You sometimes see the concept of failed state. So Libya, after Muhammad Gaddafi. So Muhammad Gaddafi was a leader of Libya for a very long time, not monarchy. And once Gaddafi was removed, there was complete lawlessness. There was no government in the first place. That is what the Americans were trying to do in Iran. What were they trying to do? Remove the Iranian regime. There is anarchy within the country, and there is no form of government. Nothing is left within the country. There is no law and order. There is no system that is left in the state. So you can have a state which does not have a functioning government or a state without a government, and that state is generally called a failed state. Afghanistan, for a meanwhile, Somalia is a very good example of this. It doesn't have a functioning government and certain. So when you're writing as an example, mention the phase. Afghanistan, once the Americans left for a few intervals, they were on the verge of a failed state. Same thing happened in Myanmar. So in Myanmar, when Aung San Suu Kyi was removed, it went into becoming a or went into becoming a failed state. But Libya is a much better example. Somalia is a much better example for this, right? So you can have a state without a government. This part is clear? Yeah. All right. Tell me one more. Can you have a government without a state? How? History's been done. Can you tell me a government that existed in India without being in India? Governments in exile, yes, Chanamya. What would be an example you would give? It's a correct way. Yeah. You can. So that's what I'm saying. You can have a government without a state. So yes, Jamia, the French in World War II, once the Germans ended up conquering France, you had a French government that was established outside of France. Why? Because Paris and the French territory was undertaken by the or overtaken by the Germans. With the Polish, it has happened. Taiwan would not be the prime example in here. The closest example you would find are Tibetans. So in India, you have a Tibetan government in exile. Like you have Dharamshala na, in Himachal Pradesh. So they have a Tibetan government in exile. If you study modern history during British India period, what did Subhash Chandra Bose do? He formed a government in exile. What did a lot of other leaders ended up doing? Let's say you talk about the Gadar movement. What did they try to do? Form a government in exile in Canada and the US. So it's a common concept that comes up in history also. I'm giving an example from IR, but an example from history would also be better because you're directly connecting it from India. Like you can give the example of Subhash Chandra Bose when he formed a government in Singapore in exile. So you can have a government without a state. The French are also a good example in this context. This part is clear to everyone? The next basic definition after state, right? This is why we're going through basic understanding. So when I use the word state, it doesn't mean just this. This is nuance. This is understanding. So when I say like you can have a government without a state, then the question is like what you said. What is a government then? This part is clear. And let's say when Libya doesn't have a government, what is it that it is missing? This context is clear to everyone? Okay, fine. All right, just everyone's written this also as examples, or just take a screenshot otherwise. Write down. The Montevideo Convention 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 defines a state, state, defines a state with a permanent population, with a permanent population, comma, defined territory, defined territory, defined territory, comma, a functioning government, a functioning government, a functioning government, and 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 the capacity to enter and the capacity to enter and the capacity to enter into relations and the capacity to enter into relations with other states and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. Other states, right? So this is an official definition that comes from the Montevideo Convention itself. This part is clear. Let me just give you one more example because it helps with what would you call a state without sovereignty? A vassal. What else? Client state from modern history. A colony. And what would be an example that we would give for this? It links back into Montevideo Convention. You're not able to enter into relations with other states. But what would you give an example? Hong Kong, fine. Something closer. History, not IR. Like you can give Gaza, you can give Palestine, you can give Taiwan as examples, fine. But I'm asking from modern history, what would we give an example? It was us, British India. A state without sovereignty. When we were under the control of the British, we had a population, we had a territory, we had a government which was controlled by the British. But what is it that we wanted? What was the slogan that Jawaharlal Nehru and others ended up giving? The Poon Swaraj. What does Poon Swaraj mean here? Poon Swaraj here means sovereignty. Right? This became the difference between the earlier Congress and you can say post-Gandhi Congress, or the difference between the Congress of the 1910s, 1920s, which demanded a Commonwealth status similar to Canada and all of this, that will have certain level of decision-making powers for ourselves, but will still function under the British Empire. This was like the princely states. But when we ended up giving the slogan of Poon Swaraj, that is what we demanded, that we want sovereignty. It gives us the ability to enter into relations with other states. It gives us the ability to form our own government. Right? This comes back when we do the preamble. Preambles comes with the word, starts with the word, we the people of India constitute a sovereign democratic republic. Secular and socialist words were added later, but the original preamble ended up using these three words: sovereign, democratic, republic. What does sovereign means? It is that it is the people that have the power. If you're not sovereign, you cannot form your own government. When India was not sovereign, when we were under the control of the British, it is the British that ended up deciding who would form the government in India. The second word that we end up using is democratic, meaning it is the people that are going to choose the leader. That is why the word republic comes after. Republic means that the head of the state is chosen by the people. So if you look at UK is a monarchy, meaning it has a king. As of now, it has a king. So the head of the state, which is the king is not chosen by the people. So it is not a republic. India, the United States are republic because the head of the state is chosen by the people. But to be a republic, you need to be first democratic. To be democratic, the first you need to be sovereign. You're able to link it to modern history now, or some aspect of modern history. It's clear to everyone? All right. Write down separately. Separately. Um, State in the Indian Constitution. State in the Indian Constitution. State in the Indian Constitution. Constitution. Right. So if you look at these aspects, you have given examples, or we have talked about examples from, let's say, international relations. We've talked about examples from modern history. But again, it has to be linked back to polity. So when we talk about the first aspect, which is population, where is the term population mentioned? So next to it, you end up writing, it is mentioned in the preamble, which talks about we the people of India. Right? We the people of India. Right? So when we get to the preamble, I'll come back to this. Right? That the first thing, or what is the population of India? We the people of India. Right? Second aspect of this, of population, citizenship. Right? So what is the population? Or who are the people of India? The ones that are given citizenship under part 2. Part 2 of the Constitution. Part 2 of the Constitution. Of the Constitution. Right? The third example that you can also give in relation to this is how do we measure the population? How do we measure the population? It is based on census. So the census is ongoing. You can give the example of Article 81, Article 330. When we get to Article 81, then I'll come back to this again. But it ends up saying that who is the population of India? How do we decide that this person is or this individual is part of the population of India? It is based on the census. Right? You get this first part? Right? So this becomes the examples or the linkages that you end up making in relation to polity. Right on the second one, which is territory. Territory. So the example you would give here is part 1 of the Constitution, which talks about union and its territory. Union and its territory. Within that context, it also is Schedule 1. So how do you know that, all right, these are the boundaries of Assam, these are the boundaries of Rajasthan, these are the boundaries of Jammu and Kashmir, these are the boundaries, these are given in Schedule 1 of the Constitution. That, all right, these are the various boundaries of this particular state. And it ends up giving what is known as the complete boundaries of India. And in relation to this, yes, Article 1 in itself, India, that is Bharat. So you have part 1, which talks about the territory of India. All of this we'll do when we get to that particular part itself. Right? I don't want to get ahead into the topics. Right? So these are meant to ensure that when I do talk about Article 1 and Part 1, you're able to understand. The third one is government. Government. Right? So you have the Constitution of India that gives the form of government. It talks about the legislature, which is the parliament. It talks about the executive, which includes the president, the prime minister, the chief ministers, the governors, and it talks about the judiciary. Right? So you have the Supreme Court, High Court, district courts, tribunals, etc. Right? It talks about on how India would be governed. Right? Apart from this, you can also give the example here of extraterritorial jurisdiction and laws. Extraterritorial jurisdiction and laws. So these are separate articles of the Constitution of India, Article 260 and I think 272. So we'll get to those articles when we get to those classes. But what it basically ends up saying is that, let's say there is some foreign territory. Now, that territory is not under the control of India. It is not a sovereign part of India. It is not mentioned in first schedule. But for some reason, this territory is being governed by India. So this territory or some aspect of this territory is being governed by India. I'll give you an example. Up till I think Indira Gandhi's tenure, you had the Indian rupee, which was a legal tender in certain Middle East countries like Oman and others. So you had some form of extraterritorial jurisdiction in the context that the monetary policy of those countries were being governed to some extent by India. It was a follower from the British India government. India generally doesn't do extraterritorial jurisdiction. We generally don't like this. Embassies are an example of this, yes. But these are smaller examples. When we get to that article, I explain this in depth, what we mean by extraterritorial jurisdiction. So you can write Indian embassies within that context. So, similarly, extraterritorial laws, meaning that the laws of India are not confined only to the territory of India. So let's say if there is an Indian ship that is there in the international oceans and it is attacked by a foreign country, especially a country that we are at war with. So that attack would be considered as an attack on the sovereignty of India. So in that context, let's say there is a particular Indian that has gone abroad and has committed a crime. So you can have extraterritorial application of India's laws on that particular individual. Let's say you've gone abroad, you've committed a crime, you can be charged for that particular crime within India. So you can have some form of extraterritorial law, but I'll talk about this when we get to that particular topic. You get the basic idea here? Right? Basic concept is clear to everyone? Right. Right on the last one, which is sovereignty. Sovereignty. So it is mentioned in the preamble, right? So we talked about this. The first word, we the people of India constitute India as a sovereign. Second, it is a form of reasonable restriction. You can give the example of Article 19, Clause 2. We'll talk about this when we get to that topic. Reasonable restrictions. So what happens is that Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A, it ends up saying freedom of speech and expression, that every citizen of India has freedom of speech and expression. But it's not absolute. It doesn't mean that you can say or do whatever you want. So there are reasonable restrictions on them, which is given in what is known as Article 19, Clause 2. And one of the restriction is sovereignty and integrity of India, meaning your speech and your expressions cannot harm the sovereignty and the integrity of India. Same way you have the freedom of business, let's say to freedom of profession, freedom to conduct business. But your business cannot be to fund terrorist organizations, right? You cannot harm the sovereignty and integrity of India. So you have fundamental rights. You have fundamental right of speech. You have fundamental right of profession. You have a fundamental right of business. But there are reasonable restrictions. One of them being sovereignty and integrity. You cannot do anything that harms the sovereignty of India. This part is clear to everyone? The concept is clear? Yeah. 33 years. Apart from this, fundamental duty, right? Fundamental duty under Article 51A. A in capital. 51A. Article 51A. So Article 51A gives fundamental duties. Fundamental duties basically mean that there are certain level of duties that is expected that a citizen of India would fulfill. Expected that a citizen of India would fulfill. One of those duties is that the citizens of India would uphold the sovereignty and integrity of India, meaning as citizens of India will protect India's sovereignty. That is one of our duties. So these are the examples that you end up giving in relation to state. The concept is clear, right? So if you see here, we've talked about what is a state. So we've talked about what is a state and what are the four characteristics of a state: population, territory, government, and sovereignty. Further, we talked about what are the different aspects of a state. So if you have a state without sovereignty, it is known as a colony. So an example of this would be British India. If you can have a government without a state, an example of this would be the Tibetan government in exile. The example of this would be the French during World War II. You can also have a territory without a statehood. An example of this would be Antarctica. You can have a population that doesn't have a state. So even though a population is the essential characteristic of a state, you can have a population without a state. So the Kurdish are known as the largest ethnic group without a state. That is the official line that is used for them. And you can have a state without a government. That would be known as a failed state. So Ganesh, the fundamental duty thing is that if I'll show you. Right. So it gives what are the fundamental duties. It shall be the duty of every citizen of India. It's a separate topic we'll do when we get to fundamental duties. It ends up saying that it is the duty of every citizen of India to uphold and protect the sovereignty, unity, and integrity of India. So as citizens of India, it is our duty to ensure that we protect the sovereignty. So it becomes an example that you end up writing in the UPSC answer. It gives you clarity as to what do we mean by sovereignty. Is clear, Ganesh? Yes. And as far as the examples are concerned, from the Indian Constitution, you understand for population, territory, government, and sovereignty. Any doubts as of now? Because we're done with the first basic understanding of state. The status is specific to religious community. Umesh, I'll give you the difference, right? This is the next thing I'll make you right is the concept of a state is different from the concept of a nation. So that'll make you right. So I'll make you right. But I want to first talk about this particular PYQ. So this was asked in 2023. It talks about which of one of the following best defines the term state, meaning there could be more than one option that is correct. So what is the best definition of a state? Just read it once, all of you. Or I'm not looking for. I think you should be able to answer this question based on what we've gone through. But everyone's read, right? What I want to talk about is falsification, because this is something we're going to do with all the polity PYQs. Right. Let's say you take the first, let's say D. A society permanently living in a definite territory with a central authority, an executive responsible to the central authority, and an independent judiciary. Why is this statement wrong? In one line, tell me why this statement is wrong. Say it again. No, actually, a population has to be permanent. That part is fine. But there's another aspect, two aspects that is wrong. No, sovereignty is not missing. When it says a central authority, it means there is some concept of sovereignty. It's not explicitly mentioned, sovereignty, but fine, you can infer in that particular. Why is this statement wrong? Why can't it mean state? It has a population. Right now, you get why the problems occur within polity or prelims. All of you are like correct. The A is the correct answer, but you should be able to tell me in one line why the others are wrong. Because in your mind, you know that the others are wrong. That's why you have chosen A. The clarity would therefore be missing if you can't tell me why the other options are wrong. Let's say C, a number of persons who have been living in a definite territory for a very long time with their own culture, tradition, and government. But it's not the reason why it would be wrong. Yeah. Again, then what you're saying is not wrong. um, But what happens is it has to be very specific. This thought process that you're having, because you get about 1.5 minutes roughly to answer in prelims for one question, you won't have that luxury of thinking about this in that deeper context. So it has to be very quick, like one line. All right, this is why this is wrong. Sandeep, you're right. It has 4 parameters. The this one at any point of time does not explicitly mention the term sovereignty. So it cannot be the best. It could be correct, like it has some form of state, but it cannot be the best reflection of it. Similarly, let's say you talk about B, a politically organized people of a definite territory possessing an authority to govern them. So possessing an authority to govern them, it means that they have sovereignty, maintain law and order, protect their natural rights, and safeguard their means of sustenance. So population is there, sovereignty is there, government is there. Why why is this wrong then? But that is not necessary. Natural rights are mentioned that rights are the 4 parameters there or not in the first place? Yes or no? Does option B say population, right? Politically organized people. Does it mention territory? Yes, a definite territory possessing an authority to govern them, meaning they have sovereignty and they have some form of, and they have a government itself because they're able to govern themselves and they are politically organized. So why is this statement not the correct answer? And why are you saying A? It's the same thing here. Community of persons permanently occupying a definite territory. Population is there, territory is there, independent of external control, sovereignty is there, possessing an organized government is there. Both of them have the 4 features. Let's say we can eliminate C and D because it does not directly talk about, let's say, sovereignty. Fine. They cannot be the best definition. But what is wrong with B? Why is A a better territory? Permanent and definite territory, like, it's not a problem here. You're getting the problem. This is what happens when you're writing for the UPSC prelims. You would get confused between A and B. Some of you would write A, some of you would write B. Then people would debate this on Telegram and every other place that no, A is correct, B is correct. Then we wait for UPSC answer key. Fine. That is the quite common. But now you don't have to worry. UPSC has said they'll give the answer keys quickly after prelims. You get why falsification is important. So understanding falsification, understanding why something is wrong, it gives you conceptual clarity. So it's not just only about knowing what is the correct answer. It's also knowing why the others are wrong. If you look at B, both of them have all the 4 aspects. But why is A still better? B is talking about a democratic state. Right? B is talking about a democratic state, politically organized, protect their natural rights and safeguard their means of sustenance. But protecting their natural rights does come from a certain aspect of what is known as a liberal state or what is known as a liberal democratic state. The question is not asking that. The question is not asking what is a liberal best definition of a liberal state. If they would have asked what is the best definition of liberal state, then B is the correct answer. They have asked what is the best definition of a state. Direct, straightforward A, B, C, D. It has population, it has territory, it has government, and it has sovereignty. Does it say that it is a form of monarchy or democracy or dictatorship? No, because all of them are legitimate forms of government as far as the concept of, say, simplistic and there is something that add on to when we talk about falsification, which is known as Occam's razor. Whenever you're stuck between 2 options, the simpler answer is generally the correct answer. That is what Occam's razor says. So the basic core idea of the view is generally the simplest answer is the correct answer. So if you're stuck between A and B, this one is more complicated. This one is simpler. This one probably is much more correct. And the answer says best. So this I've talked before. It means that there would be multiple options that are correct. You have to find which one is the best. And A is therefore the best. C and D, let's say you eliminate because one of them does not talk about sovereignty. B you eliminate because it talks about a liberal state, not a state. So clear to everyone? Right. So this is something we're going to do. 15 questions, each prelims examination, more than 170 questions we're going to discuss in class. And we're going to discuss it the way that we've discussed this as of now. We're going to discuss it in depth so that you're able to understand how UPSC forms question and you're able to understand answer them properly. Like one of the because Umesh ended up saying tricky. Yes, these are tricky questions, but I want to add to one more point. You sometimes see videos like, oh, there are tricks to answering these questions that you do this, better way to eliminate. Don't fall for that. Like that is way too complicated. If you know correct, if you understand what is incorrect, that is the best way. If you fall for these kind of tricks, I'd never seen in my past 10 years that they have worked for somebody. They might work with 1 or 2 questions, but that is bias. Meaning because it has worked for me, that's why they're correct. But if the same thing has not worked for 99 other people. So it's a bias or a confirmation bias that has kicked in here. That for me, all right, it worked, but for the 99 others, it did not work. Simpler. Why something is wrong, why something is correct, do it completely for everything. MCQs you'll do with. I did this when I gave the net examination like 10 years ago. I qualified the first time, got All India rank 3. My brother, he qualified NEET and then qualified PG and all of that. First, same thing. And it's very common in China and the United States. I think in India, maybe the ideas might be catching up now. This part is clear to everyone? All right. Write down. Give a heading. Nation. 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 So the first word that we have understood is state. Second, nation. A nation is a cultural, a nation is a cultural, social, 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 and linguistic community of of people who share a common history, who share a common history, who share a common history, tradition, and beliefs. Share a common history, tradition, and belief. Belief. There is a there is a common sense of identity. There is a common sense of identity. There is a common sense of identity. Identity. Sense of identity. It can exist across borders. It can exist across borders. It can exist across borders. Borders. Fine. Cross borders. 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 So sometimes as far as polity is concerned, you can use them as synonyms. You can use the word state until this specifically they've asked state, then it's different. But state, nation, nation state, country, all of these are used as synonyms. You find them in the newspapers also, you find them during classes also. And as far as polity is concerned, you can use them as synonyms of each other, meaning you can replace one with the other. So when we talk about a nation is not necessarily a state, right? So you can have a nation, but let's say you have the Kurds. So Kurds live in Iraq, they live in Turkey, they live in Iran, they live in Syria. They're the largest ethnic group without a state, meaning they have a common sense of identity. The common sense of identity comes from their common language, it comes from their common religion, it comes from their common ethnicity, which is the primary reason for their identity. What is generally seen is that it is generally nations that form strong states. Right? So nations end up forming stronger states. So you take, let's say, the example of Europe. Europe was the first one that formed or conceptually ended up forming what are known as nation states, meaning that there is a particular sense of identity. And based on that particular identity, you have formed a state, meaning you have a government and sovereignty, or basically all the four features. So there is a certain level of continuous territory. The population that lives in that continuous territory have a common identity. So, and they have chosen that we are going to form a government and we're going to form a state. So if you look at Europe, this is known as Peace of Westphalia. It happened during the 1600s, not relevant for polity per se. The core idea being that Europe was formed on the basis of language. So you have the You have France, which was formed on the French language. You had Portugal on the Portuguese, Italy on the Italian language, Greeks on the Greek language, German on the Germanic languages, UK on the English language. But you look at most of Europe, it ended up being formed on the basis of language. Why? If you look at their religion, it was quite common. Most of them were Christians. There was a certain level of division between the Catholics and the Protestant, but by and large, completely Christian. What was the separating part between all of them was language. So if you look at the European nation states, they were formed on the basis of this, which became language. Sandeep, India is, yes, in one common sense, it's a nation state, but India is much more of a civilizational state. So there is not, what is a common sense of identity that binds India? It's something that people have. I don't want to get into depth of this. I've written once a paper on this, but um, what is it that binds India? And then you have different political parties, different views. Like you have this famous actor and certain individuals that end up saying that it is the British that created India. But the term India or the concept of Jambudvipa, Bharatavarsha, they've existed for multiple occasions. So this is something when we talk, I will make you write from a UPSC sanitized version when we do Article 1, India, that is Bharat. Why are we named India? Why are we named Bharat? And what is it that makes us a nation? But what is our common identity? Like all of you call yourself Indians. What is it? Why? You cannot say that you were born here, your parents are Indians, that's why. But what is the primary reason that it's not just about being Indian? We're proud to be Indians. Like I want to continue being a Indians. Indians that grow abroad also are like remain quite Indian. So what is it the common identity? It's not language. Language is completely distributed differently within India. Ethnicity is not one of them. So you have, let's say, the Kurdish population, Saudi Arabia being formed on the Saudi tribal groups. It's not ethnicity because we're too diverse. History, every country has history. Like if you take China, China is 90% Han Chinese, meaning they have one ethnic group, which is generally the Han Chinese, plus they have a common language, which is Mandarin. They're also a civilizational state and a nation state, but they have a common sense of identity, which is formed on this. If you look at the 10%, which is Tibetan Uyghurs, Mongolia, these are places that the Chinese have invaded. But they have a common sense of identities. Do you look at Japan? Japan is based on the Japanese language, based on the Japanese ethnic group. Korea based on the Korean ethnic group, Korean language. India doesn't. History or the freedom movement formed a sense of belonging. But what is the sense of belonging? Right? So we'll talk about this when we do Article 1. It's a very controversial question, but I'll make you write it in a much more way that suited for UPSC. Right. Economic ties, social ties. India has been in the past for 5,000 years of history, who have been disunited, who have been united, right? It's complicated. We are a civilizational state, but what is our common sense of identity? That is always controversial as to what it is. You have the right wing in India, which ends up saying, and various individuals from centrist policy viewpoints also, that end up saying that it is religion. Hinduism became the core reasoning of the unity that ends up forming here. But I'll talk about this when we get to Article 1. But the concept of nation is clear to everyone, right? Yes. Right. If you end up forming a state which is not a nation, so you see this in Africa. If you look at Africa, a lot of these countries were formed in what is known as Conference of Africa. And in this, you had the European powers that met in Europe, took out a map of Africa and drew lines. That's why if you see the line between Libya and Egypt, it's a straight line because it was drawn in Europe. They took a map and drew straight lines and divided the complete of Africa among them, so without asking the Africans. But when they ended up doing this, they ended up forming various states in Africa. But these states in Africa consisted of multiple nations or multiple identities. So some would be from different. So you look at Rwanda. Rwanda had the Houthis and the Tutsis. they were always antagonistic to each other. But when the Europeans formed the state of Rwanda, they put both of them together. And they have always been in conflict with each other. You look at our history. You look at Pakistan, which was created by the British. They took 5 ethnic groups. You took the Baloch, you took the Pathans in Northwest Frontier, you took the Punjabis, you took the Sindhis, you took the Mujahirs. From those Mujahirs are the ones that went from UP Bihar into Pakistan, and you took the Bengalis in Bangladesh, or at that time East Pakistan, and you made them what is known as the Pakistani state. But it's a weak state. These 5 groups have not lived together at any point of time in terms of, let's say, their common sense of identity. You ended up forming that Pakistan, the common identity is religion. Right? That became the whole two-nation theory, that Hindus and Muslims cannot, uh, factually wrong, Hindus and Muslims cannot live together. That's why you need a separate state of Pakistan. I don't want to get into depth of the two-nation theory, but you ended up forming, fine, a complete Pakistan. What happened a few years later? You had the split between West Pakistan and East Pakistan. The view in Bangladesh was, fine, if I continue to become a state, I can maintain my national identity, which is based on Islam, but I can also maintain my national identity, which is based on Bengali. I don't want to live under the Punjabis anymore. Same thing you see in Baloch. Balochis are saying that fine, we were created on the basis of two-nation theory, that on basis of religion, but I want to also protect my Baloch identity. I don't want to live under the domination of Pakistan. Same as with the Pathans that are there in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa with the Tehreek-e-Taliban. So Pakistan has always been said is an extremely weak state. Why? Because it was an artificial creation where you took multiple identities and put them together. And you presume that religion in itself would be strong enough to hold them together, which is not true. You see this within the Middle East also. This idea of that the Arabs having a common, they have a common religious identity, but they have much stronger tribal identities. And that is why you fight the Yemenis fighting the Saudis, and you have the Iraqis fighting, oh, almost everyone they have fought in their 50 years of history. You get this concept. So when you put different nations together or different identities together into a state, it generally falls apart. And we've seen this in Africa, we've seen this in other parts of the world. The only unique case is India. It was always said, so like Winston Churchill ended up saying that India is like the equator, meaning it's not a state, like it's not a nation state. It is as diverse if you take the complete of equator. And everyone presumed that India would break up as soon after independence because of our diversity from language to ethnicity and all of this. We are one of the few that have not actually broken up, who have actually expanded. So Jammu Kashmir became part, you had Hyderabad become part, Goa become part, Sikkim become part. So India has actually expanded over time. So India is not just a nation state, we are a civilization. What is our common sense of belonging and identity? That we'll talk about when we do Article 1. But the concept is clear. You understand the difference between nation, nation state, and state. It's clear? Right. All right. Right on the next term, government. Government. Right on. A government is defined as a body or entity. A government is defined as a body or entity that has the power, that has the power, that has the power to manage, that has the power to manage the political unit, which has the power to manage the political unit known as state, known as state. known as state. State. It has the authority. It has the authority. It has the authority to conduct the policies. It has the authority to conduct the policies, actions, authority, actions, actions, and affairs of the state. And affairs of the state. Affairs of the state. Affairs of the state. Affairs of the state. That is the um, generally agreed upon definition of government. So, what is a government? The government in itself is not separately defined from the concept of state. One of the essential features of the state is a government. And what does the government do? It has the power to manage everything, policy, affairs, everything of that particular state. Simple, clear. So you have, let's say, a dictator like Kim Jong-un, which has formed the government to manage the affairs of North Korea. You have a monarchy, let's say in Saudi Arabia, in a constitutional monarchy, let's say in United Kingdom, that manage the affairs of that state. Same way in India, you have, let's say, two levels of government. You have union, or what is known as the central government, and you have state. State not in this way, but state in terms of province. They manage the affairs of the province itself. This part is clear. Right. Write on in a paragraph below this. A government, a government generally, a government generally has three features. A government generally has three features. Generally has three features. One is to make laws. Second, to implement laws. And third, to uphold laws. Make laws, implement laws, and uphold laws. Now, in a parliamentary democracy, or generally in democracy, these would be separated. Write down. In a liberal democracy, in a liberal democracy, there would be separation of power. There would be separation of power between these three functions. Between these three functions. Between these three functions. These three functions. So what would happen is, who would make laws in a democracy? Legislature. So in India, that would be the parliament. Right? Who would implement the laws? Executive. Right? So in India, that would be the Council of Ministers. And uphold laws, that would be the judiciary. And in India, that would be the Supreme Court and High Court. Right? But it's not necessary that is the case everywhere. So you can have a government, and government generally would have these three features. But in certain places, so I'll give you an example. You take free state, or let's say when we talk about princely kingdoms, right? When we talk about history, ancient history, medieval history, the king was all three. The king is the one that makes the laws. The king is the one that implements the laws. And king is the one that upholds the laws. This is generally seen in dictatorships. You look at Kim Jong-un. He's the one who says this is the law. This is how it should be implemented. This is how it should be done. And I'm the one that is going to decide whether the law has been broken or not. This is something that the kings used to do in the past. With Montesquieu and the emergence of liberal democracies during the 1600s and later, and formation of the United States, you had this concept come in, which is known as separation of power. It's a separate topic we'll do later. But the core idea being is that the one that makes the laws cannot be the one that implements the laws. And they definitely cannot be the one that upholds the law. So these become three different categories. You had a legislature, which is directly elected by the people. You have an executive, which is also directly, in some places, directly elected by the people. And you also have a judiciary. In US, the judiciary is also elected by the people in certain situations. Like they do have judges that are elected to offices. Not all of them, not all offices, but in certain places. And this is what is Tanuj, bureaucracy is executive only. It is known as the permanent executive. So you have politicians that are elected, like Narendra Modi, they're there for 5 years or uh, um, depending on the time they're elected, they're known as the political executive. And then you have the permanent executive for which you are preparing for, meaning you're continuously in the office. And one of the things that we'll talk about role of civil services, it is very difficult to remove bureaucrats in India. Like you had this girl that changed her name and gave fake documents, forgetting her name. She was a probationary officer from Maharashtra. Uh, who? What was the full form? Pooja Khetka. Pooja Khetka. Like she was a probationary officer who have not been able to still remove her from office. So bureaucracy are generally known as the part of the executive. They are the ones that implement the law. So you tomorrow you become an IAS officer, IPS officer. It is your duty to implement the laws that have been formed by the parliament. This part is clear to everyone, right? So when we do executive, and we'll talk about this, right? You're able to differentiate between, let's say, the past, where all of these three functions were done by one individual, in this case being the king. In certain countries like North Korea, it is still one individual, or in certain places like Saudi Arabia, one family that ends up performing all of these general functions. Any doubts? What is the last line you have written? Or these three functions. And you're able to write examples, right? In this way, you'll be able to write, right? Just write it accordingly. All right. Write on the next term. Write on the next term. Constitution. 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 Write down. Constitution is the fundamental law. Constitution is the fundamental law of the state. Of the state. It is the supreme law of the land. It is the supreme law of the land. It is the supreme law of the law of the land. Supreme law of the land. These are two different words, right? Supreme law meaning that there is nothing above this. So India is also a constitutional democracy, meaning what is at the top? It is the constitution. This is something that we'll talk about when we do Article 368, meaning is it the people of India or is it the constitution that is supreme? If the people of India is supreme, that means the parliament has complete ability to make any law that they want. But if it is the constitution that is the supreme law, then any law that the parliament makes cannot violate the constitution. Yeah. We'll get to that. Like, I don't want to get completely into that topic, but that is the core idea, that it is the supreme law of the land. You take the example of another country. Let's say you take the example of Iran or Saudi Arabia, or you take examples of theocracies, meaning countries that are based on religion. So let's say the supreme law of the land of Saudi Arabia, or let's say Iran, it is Sharia. So meaning that the supreme law of Saudi Arabia or Iran or any of these nations would be the Sharia, which is based on the Quran. The context would be then, can, let's say, the Iranian parliament or let's say the Saudi family, can they change anything in the supreme law or do anything that violates the supreme law? Can they make a law that violates the supreme law? Yes or no? Yes or no? No. No. It's a word of God. So in theocracies, these are, when we talk about theocracies, so let's say if India had been built, let's say, as a Hindu Rashtra, or you take back when you had polities during ancient India, which was governed on Dharma Shastra, you could not change them. You cannot violate, let's say, Manusmriti, or you cannot violate any of the Dharma Shastra. Why? Because it is the word of God itself, himself. And similarly, you have the Sharia, which is, let's say, followed in Iran or followed in Saudi Arabia or followed in other places. It's the word of God. The individual or the people do not have the authority or the right to change that. Same way when you look at Christian theocracies that existed in the past, let's say the Vatican City and others, in today's term, you cannot violate what has been given in, let's say, the Christian laws. Why? Because those are the words of God. In the same way, different countries, different states have a different idea what for them is the supreme law. So if you go to North Korea, whatever Kim Jong-un says, that is the supreme law. He himself can change this. But in India, that is not the case. In India, you have the constitution, which is the supreme law. And any other law that is formed afterwards, let's say by the state governments, by the union, they cannot violate this supreme law. You get the concept here? Right? Yeah. Then you have the concept of what is known as a fundamental law. Fundamental law basically means that any other law that is made by, let's say, the legislature, made by anyone, an order of the IAS officer, whatever it may be, it has to flow from the supreme law. It has to flow for the supreme laws. I'll give you an example. Let's say you take Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran and Saudi Arabia, let's say, have formed a law on marriage. The age of marriage, the consent of marriage, the way that the marriage would be conducted, it has to be based on the supreme law, which is given in the Sharia. They cannot violate that law. So any fundamental law which is formed by, let's say, the legislature or by individuals that are in power or the government that is in power, it has to flow from a supreme law within that context. So any law that is made in India by the union government, by the parliament, by anyone, it has to come from the constitution of India. It cannot violate the constitution of India. So let's say the constitution of India ends up saying that everyone has the Article 21, everyone has the right, 21A, sorry, right to education. So the government ended up forming, or the legislature ended up forming, the Right to Education Act, right? So it is a fundamental law. Every other law flows from this fundamental law, right? This part is clear. Let's say you take in India what are known as customary or customary law or religious laws. So let's say you take the idea of marriage. So you have the Hindu Marriage Act. So a part of the Hindu Marriage Act comes from the Dharma Shastra. Like this is the age of marriage. This is how the what would be considered as a marriage. So you can have a Gandharv marriage. The Gandharv marriage is how Ma Parvati got married to Shiv or Lord Shiva with the exchange of the garlands. So that is a Gandharv marriage. You can have a Vedic marriage where you take 7 rounds around a fire. Similarly, you have the Islamic law in relation to marriages, that this is how the nikah would be signed, this is what meher would be. So all of these would flow, some parts of this from India's constitution, some part of this would flow from religious law. But the religious law cannot violate the constitution. So this came up when we talk about the triple talaq. So the religion may allow for triple talaq, but the constitution does not. The Hindu religion may allow for multiple marriages, but the Indian constitution may not allow for this. So in this way, the supreme law in India would be the constitution. You get the core idea here when we say supreme law and fundamental law. Supreme law meaning no law above it. Fundamental law that all laws would flow from it. All, not necessarily. It's not necessary that all customs would be respected. That if the customs violate fundamental rights, then there would not be. So that is why triple talaq has been banned. That is why you allowed in the Sabrimala judgment, you allowed women to go into Sabrimala because it might have been a custom of a community, but if it violates of the Constitution of India, then those things would not be allowed. That is why the Constitution is the supreme law in India. Haha, that will do when we do Article 25, right? Much later. You get the concept of when we say the word supreme and fundamental. Any doubts on this, anyone? Hmm. Oh, hmm. See, the Constitution does say we should need to have uniform civil code. The Constitution also says that you can have customary laws for communities. So, in those situations, they have to be taken as a balanced view with each other. When we talk about Article 44 and we get to uniform civil code, I'll make you write the debate itself, and I'll tell you what are the problems with having a uniform civil code and what are the advantages of having a uniform civil code. So that is a much larger debate that we'll get to when we get to UCC. The idea with the constitution is that yes, it is a supreme law, but the supreme law has contradictions in it. So when those contradictions come up, that you have the right to protest in India, like what happened at Jantar Mantar and everything, you have the right to protest in India, but it's not a absolute right. There are certain restrictions that have been placed on this. Who decides what the balance is and how the balance would be maintained? That is for the judiciary to decide. That is for the legislature to decide. The legislature would make the law on how the balance would be maintained. The judiciary would decide whether the balance is being maintained or not. So it becomes complicated in that particular way. Or any other doubts, anyone? Or write on a heading, but this is something we'll do in the next class. Why do we need a constitution? Why do we need a constitution? Why do we need a constitution? content current affairs. That's why I'm. So I have no idea. I've said this before. Just revise what we've done in class. Also, like half the class was just orientation. Just revise what is done in the class. Go back, read it from the appropriate notes, and that's it. From tomorrow, I'll be starting. I'll start to give test. So from tomorrow onwards, you study what has been done in the class, you write the test, and then you study from certain books as to how to get this done. Right? Right? So you have written the line, why do we need a constitution? This is something we'll do in the next class, but in brackets on the side, like one of those notes that you end up making, uh, read the chapter state. Read the chapter state from political theory, class 11th. State. Political theory, class 11th. Class 11th. So it would be in the political theory book, right? It won't be in the Indian Constitution ever. I think political theory. If you don't have this, I think we're in the group together. If somebody doesn't have this, just tell me. I'll share the PDF in the group itself. So you just go through that chapter. Tomorrow we'll do a test on both the state plus the constitution, the basic ideas of constitution. I'll tell you tomorrow. Yeah. Right. Any doubts as of now, anyone? So that was not my choice, no. I gave you like written test, no, for all of you to write answers. You to continuously send answers. All right. Also, just write on my number. If anyone has a doubt, you can message me separately also. I think you would also have the number available in the group. But anyways, still write it. Double. So if you have a doubt, you want to talk, just send me a WhatsApp message. We can have a conversation. It's not a problem.